This was my third Antarctic photographic expedition, and as we sailed from Ushuaia, I couldn't help but wonder what photographic opportunities and adventures awaited us. The previous two had been quite different from each other, and as it turned out, this one too had its ups and downs. The down was the first few days in the South Shetland Islands, which is what one encounters on the way to the Antarctic Peninsula. The first day on Desolation Island, we had weather which is best described as dreary. No different really than a drizzly winter day in New York, Toronto, or Berlin. And it took its toll in terms of some camera equipment succumbing to the humidity and the moisture. But though there wasn't much in the way of landscape photography opportunities, the wildlife was great, with seal colonies, penguin colonies, and some pretty interesting photographs resulted. But after our second day in the South Shetlands with heavy overcast, I consulted with the captain and the expedition leader, and we decided that our best opportunity was to bug out and head south and try and get as far south down below the Antarctic Circle as quickly as we could. And so 24 hours of sailing offshore, just steaming as quickly as we could, did in fact bring us out of the heavy overcast and into a few days of some of the most stunning Antarctic landscape photographic opportunities that I'd ever encountered. Having pushed through the sea ice, our first landfall was at Stonington Island, where there had previously been both American and British bases. I quite enjoyed this landing because it was an opportunity to photograph some of the, shall we call them, artifacts that were left behind by the Americans. After Stonington Island, we started to head north again, and this led us to the Gullet, which is an interesting, though appropriate name for one of the least visited areas of the Antarctic Peninsula south of the Antarctic Circle. Our captain, Alexei, had some 10 or 12 years of sailing experience in Antarctica with something like 100 voyages, and this was only the second time that he had sailed through the Gullet. And one of the reasons for this is not only because it lies so far south for expedition and tourist ships, but also because many years it's completely ice-clogged. And there's really no way of knowing because so few ships sail down into this area. So we were taking a bit of a risk. Our 24 hours out in the open sea to get that far south paid off in terms of putting us into some wonderfully clear weather. But we ran the risk that we might get to this very narrow channel, find it clogged with ice, and then have to backtrack and head back out through the open sea once again, which those of us who tended towards seasickness were not looking forward to. But we spent one of the most remarkable days of not just my photographic life, but maybe of my life, and many of the other members of the trip said the same thing. It was just glorious. Crystalline ice, dark black water, the bluest, deepest sky I have ever seen, and of course, other than the sounds of the ship, just the silence, no human beings for 1,000 miles. It really provided a sense of the grandeur and the desolation. because of its isolation, we were told that maybe no more than a couple of ships every couple of years go through the gullet. It was fascinating to contemplate that very few human beings in the history of the planet had ever visited this incredible landscape. The only analogy I could think of was that this was something like sailing through the Rockies, almost a dreamlike experience. What was fun is standing on the bridge and looking at the GPS map. Captain Alexei said that, in fact, he did not trust the GPS south of the Antarctic Circle because there was a very clear disagreement between the maps, and these were the Admiralty charts, and the GPS. And at one point, the GPS actually showed us as sailing over land. And so, since the GPS doesn't know about the Admiralty charts, I think actually that the captain is right. And for some reason, once you get south of roughly about the 66th parallel, the GPS may not be as accurate as certainly as Captain Alexei would like it to be. What was a fascinating experience was standing on the bow of the ship, looking forward as we sailed through the gullet and through the ice pack, and not being able to see where we were going. And the reason for this is an almost optical illusion that there doesn't seem to be anything ahead of you except mountains and glaciers. And yet, when you get there, there seems to be a little curve, there's an opening in the ice, and the channel continues. One of the great pleasures was how slowly we were moving. It seemed almost as if it was walking pace. And you could sense while we were on the bridge that there was a lot of tension on the part of the captain. He had a smile on his face, couldn't see his eyes because he was wearing sunglasses, but Captain Alexei definitely had an air of tension and expectation around him. And the reason is, although we never really felt in danger, there was a reality that there are no ships for many hundreds of miles. There's no Coast Guard, and if you get into trouble, you have nothing but your own resources. So, although this was in many ways a tourist expedition, there really was a sense of adventure to it, and one that I've rarely felt in this kind of situation. After the gullet, we sailed up into an area called the Fish Islands and did some zodiac cruising. That was a lot of fun, not only doing landscape photography, which turned out to be very productive that day, but doing some observing of leopard seals on the ice. This one seal, who did a lot of posing for us, then became quite interested in us. And as we returned to the ship, we found him swimming next to the boat, quite fascinated with who we were and what we were doing. After the Fish Islands, we headed up into Marguerite Bay, where some of the best landscape photography opportunities existed. We had beautiful sunset light, and the moon made an appearance. By the time it was ready to go to bed, it was almost dawn. We started to sail into a glacier-filled bay where the sun was rising behind mountain peaks with clouds rapidly scudding past and the earliest rays of sunlight illuminating the peaks and the clouds. As we had feared, the weather continued to deteriorate the further north we went, and our last landing was at Deception Bay. Though we were somewhat sheltered within the caldera itself, the winds continued to build, and as we sailed out the Narrows, the winds reached almost hurricane force, and as Thomas Knoll noted, this really did almost feel like Antarctica.